After falling for 43 seconds, the time and barometric triggers started the firing mechanism. A uranium bullet fired down a barrel into a uranium target. Together, they started a nuclear chain reaction.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today, we're looking at the worst choices ever made by the U.S. government. These decisions either caused untold suffering or came back to haunt America down the road.
He thought making concessions to Southerners was what was necessary to preserve the Union.
CIA's foreign interference. After World War II, the CIA had one job: fight communism and secure resources by any means necessary. What followed was a spree of short-sighted covert operations.
The military action culminated months of secret planning by British and American intelligence agencies as part of a plot to overthrow the Iranian government.
Take the 1953 Iranian coup. By toppling a democratically elected leader, the CIA planted the seeds of regional instability that persist today. Even allies weren't safe, as seen in Italy and Australia, where they funneled funds and propaganda to sway elections. Worse, the agency helped install dictators like Mobutu Sese Seko in the Congo and Suharto in Indonesia, both notorious for human rights abuses.
After replacing Indonesia's first president, Sukarno, Suharto started to rule with an iron fist.
In Latin America, the CIA's Operation Condor saw leftists assassinated and propped up brutal right-wing dictators responsible for countless disappearances and deaths. These short-sighted interventions inflicted untold suffering and permanently damaged America's global reputation.
Amongst the victims here, Argentines, Uruguayans, Bolivians, Chileans, and Cubans. This was the center for Plan Condor in Argentina.
Laissez-Faire Economics. In the Roaring '20s, the U.S. embraced laissez-faire economics, a philosophy best described in English as hands-off.
When the sky is the limit to prosperity, it is also a long way down.
The government let the private sector take the wheel with little to no oversight. Presidents Harding and Coolidge embraced this philosophy, leading to rampant abuse and speculation and an unregulated stock market. It all came crashing down on Black Tuesday with the 1929 crash.
The collapse of the New York Stock Exchange in 1929 was only the most visible sign of a massive economic crisis, a crisis that spread quickly from Wall Street to Main Street.
Banks, operating with little oversight, extended excessive credit, creating a debt bubble that exploded. As the economy spiraled, President Hoover clung to his belief in limited government action. He resisted direct federal relief and relied on voluntary private measures.
Putting in a strong protectionist law, which is then going to trigger retaliatory measures from other countries, has the effect of putting not just the American economy, but the entire Western world's economy into nosedive.
His refusal to provide direct aid to struggling Americans exacerbated the Great Depression, spreading it like a contagion to every corner of the nation. The Iraq War. The Iraq War started with lies and ended in catastrophe. The Bush administration, led by neoconservative hawks, insisted that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. He didn't. Neocons promised Iraqis would greet us as liberators. They didn't. Instead, America dragged its allies into a brutal and unjustified occupation. It was fueled by arrogance and a complete misunderstanding of Iraq's sectarian landscape.
It was intervention on a dramatic scale, and while it destroyed Saddam's Ba'athist state, the struggle to define a new Iraq continues.
The administration's reckless decision to disband Saddam's Ba'athist government left thousands of armed, trained, and angry former soldiers unemployed. Many later joined insurgent groups, fueling the chaos that eventually birthed ISIS. The war, which cost over $1 trillion, shattered America's global credibility and left Iraq in ruins.
At first, more than 70% of Americans supported it. But that waned as the mission became mired in controversy, eventually falling to just 32%.
Interfering with and ending Reconstruction. The Reconstruction Amendments, considered to be a second Bill of Rights, had the potential to reshape America into a country that better reflected its promise of equality.
In his first speech after the Union victory, Lincoln alluded to the enormous challenges Reconstruction would bring. He even suggested that some black men in the South might get the vote. His words infuriated many.
Instead, a series of failures sabotaged it. Andrew Johnson, a Southern sympathizer, let ex-Confederates regain power in the South.
Johnson wanted the post-war South treated leniently. As for the fate of freed slaves, he wanted that left up to the states.
President Grant, who did make some strides in protecting black rights, fell victim to corruption and a lack of focus. The South saw violent white backlash under his watch in the 1876 election. That vote ended in a corrupt bargain between Rutherford B. Hayes and Southern white Democrats. When he entered office, he pulled federal troops from the South. The deal secured his presidency, dooming black Southerners to a century of segregation, voter suppression, and racial terror.
They felt the North was a vicious aggressor, committed to a perversion, which was black equality. This sense of a grievance and sense of injustice only grew. That this was something that was not to be accepted.
Internment of Japanese-Americans. After Pearl Harbor, America's fear turned into paranoia, fueled by racism. That paranoia fueled one of the most shameful mass civil rights violations in American history.
Motivated by vocal outcries from politicians and military officials, FDR signed Executive Order 9066, empowering the U.S. Army to designate areas from which any or all persons may be excluded.
In 1942, the U.S. government forcibly relocated over 120,000 Japanese Americans to internment camps under FDR's Executive Order 9066. These people, most American citizens, were imprisoned without trial for no reason other than their ancestry.
120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans within 4 months were put into barracks. I mean, how does that happen?
Families lost their homes, businesses, and dignity. The Supreme Court upheld this racist policy in Korematsu v. United States, claiming it was a, quote, military necessity. Meanwhile, actual Nazi spies operated within the country with impunity, completely undetected. Even after the war, Japanese Americans received little compensation for their suffering.
It would take over 40 years before President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, paying reparations to each victim of internment.
Korematsu wasn't officially overturned until 2018. The Vietnam War. The Vietnam War wasn't just a disaster. It was a decades-long wound on America's psyche. Sold to the public as a necessary stand against communism, the war was built on deception.
When President Kennedy first sent Americans to Vietnam in 1961, he did so with the conviction that America was the natural leader of the free world.
The Gulf of Tonkin incident, for example, was exaggerated to spread a lust for revenge. The military insisted victory was just around the corner. Another lie, exposed by the Pentagon Papers.
The New York Times has started publication of a series of reports based on a top-secret Pentagon study of the Vietnam War.
The central fact so far revealed is that there was a massive deception of the American public for starting the bombing of North Vietnam.
Meanwhile, troops, often young draftees, were dropped into a brutal conflict where they both endured and committed atrocities, like the My Lai massacre. As body bags piled up, public support collapsed. Unlike their fathers, soldiers returning home weren't welcomed as heroes. They faced hostility and indifference. The war left lasting scars, from PTSD-ridden veterans to a deep and abiding public skepticism of government.
The price was over 2 million Vietnamese and Americans dead and wounded.
SCOTUS and legalized segregation. In the aftermath of Reconstruction, the U.S. Supreme Court made a series of decisions that entrenched racial segregation for decades.
White Southerners are resistant of the idea of living in an egalitarian society in which African Americans might operate as equal partners.
The civil rights cases of 1883 struck down the Civil Rights Act of 1875, ruling that the 13th and 14th Amendments could not outlaw discrimination by private citizens. This was cemented a few years later in Plessy v. Ferguson, where SCOTUS upheld racial segregation under the guise of, quote, separate but equal.
They encode
white supremacy through the enactment of segregation statutes, taking the vote away from African Americans, all sorts of things that are designed to subordinate black people, to establish a place for black people that they know, in a sense, to choreograph race relations.
Jim Crow revived the Supreme Court stamp of approval, leading to decades of racial terror. The KKK and other white supremacist groups terrorized black communities with impunity. Violence and lynchings were commonplace. Racist laws enshrined systemic racism, economic disparity, and social marginalization, the effects of which are still felt today. Sins of the nuclear age. As of this video, the United States remains the only nation to use nuclear weapons in war.
The bomb produces some of the worst psychological tension ever in world history.
Historians still debate whether it was necessary, but there's no debating the horror unleashed. The bombs that hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 instantly killed tens of thousands, leaving many more to suffer slow, agonizing deaths from radiation exposure.
At 11:02 a.m., the B-29 dropped an atomic bomb on Nagasaki.
In the years that followed, the world lived under the shadow of mutually assured destruction, the grim doctrine that any nuclear conflict would end civilization. Meanwhile, the U.S. government secretly conducted horrific radiation experiments on unwitting civilians. Project Sunshine harvested body parts, not all from adults, to study radioactive fallout. The Cincinnati radiation experiments exposed cancer patients, many poor and black, to lethal radiation without consent.
Retired English professor Martha Stevens is a whistleblower who brought the research of Dr. Eugene Sanger to light.
The Trail of Tears. The U.S. didn't just take Native American land. It forcibly marched entire nations to their deaths.
In 1829, Andrew Jackson was elected U.S. president. He believed that Native Americans had no rights to their land and began proceedings to remove the Cherokee from the southern states.
Under the Indian Removal Act of 1830, President Andrew Jackson forced the Cherokee, Creek, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Seminole nations off their ancestral lands. The Cherokee endured the worst of it, dragged on a brutal 1,200-mile march to Oklahoma. Thousands died from exposure, disease, and starvation. Those who resisted were shackled, forced to watch soldiers looting their homes.
Thousands of Native Americans were pulled from their homes in Georgia and other states across the South. Many were shackled in chains and forced to walk at gunpoint more than 1,000 miles west.
It was a large-scale ethnic cleansing, uprooting entire cultures. The scars of this atrocity remain centuries later. Indigenous communities still fight tooth and claw for sovereignty, justice, and survival.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into Settings and switch on your notifications.
Compromising on slavery. America's worst compromises weren't about policy, but about people. From the Missouri Compromise to the Compromise of 1850, lawmakers repeatedly sacrificed human decency for political convenience.
Southerners feared that if slavery were banned in the new territories, the Union might tip in favor of abolition and destroy their economy.
They treated slavery like a political chess piece rather than a moral stain. Instead of solving the issue, these deals merely delayed the inevitable, allowing tensions to fester. The Kansas-Nebraska Act was the final insult, a compromise ending in chaos.
He thought making concessions to Southerners was what was necessary to preserve the Union.
Bleeding Kansas turned the prairies into a battleground. Pro- and anti-slavery forces slaughtered each other without mercy. The Dred Scott decision then shattered any hope of a peaceful resolution, ruling Black Americans weren't citizens at all. These half measures all but ensured war. By kicking the can down the road, America guaranteed that blood, not words, would decide its future.
The racist pro-slavery decision inflamed public opinion. It also angered a rising political star named Abraham Lincoln.
What do you think was the biggest mistake in U.S. history? Let us know in the comments.
The young professor glanced at the sky, but a thick layer of clouds obscured the aircraft. A B-29 superfortress laden with a single atomic bomb.
Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.